Hi, this is Mr. Block, and I'm going to be gone again today. Sorry about that. We're going to go over our next section in Chapter 4, which is on human populations and demographics. So, demographics is basically the study of human population changes and why populations change and what we see in societies that make populations change. Um, One of the first things when we look at first thing I want to show you is world population. This is in 2005 that I'm looking at here, and it says 6.47 billion. In LiveBinders, there's a website. It's called World of 7 Billion, and if you look at it, it has a counter that's just counting how our world population is changing right now, and it says we're at 7.5 billion and 326 million here in the U.S. Okay, so our population is changing, and not only is our population changing, but the demographics of our population is changing over time. And there's a lot of key terms that we'll talk about: birth rates, death rates, demographic transition, demography, family planning, life expectancy, uh, zero population growth, total fertility, things like that. Okay. So, like I said, our population is growing. It was 6.47 billion in 2005, and it's 7.5 billion right now. Okay. Um, why is that happening? Well, every second, 4 children are born while approximately 2 die. All right. So, we'll talk about the factors behind that. So the net gain is 2.3 humans added to the world population every second, or 72 million a year. And, that's a very unsustainable growth. Just like when we looked at our yeast population, when those were growing, they can't go on forever, and eventually they reach their carrying capacity. Well, the same thing can happen to humans. So here is a look at human population for, since recorded history, 8,000 BC. So for thousands of years, humans struggled along, and our population stayed very steady. Um, it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution, major changes occurred during that time that allowed our population to do what it's done in the last 200 years. All right. Mechanization, um, industrialization of agriculture. So one person can grow enough food for 10 people, hundreds of people in certain cases. So this freed people up to do other things, and refrigeration of food, improvement of vaccines, improvement of, infant mortality rates. All of these things kind of all happened at once. And so our population has been increasing ever since. You can see the dip in the 1500s there when the plague occurred and took about half, I think a half to a quarter of the world population. Okay, so we can look at a graph like that, but another thing that we can look at is something called doubling time, and we'll do a lab on this, just a calculation lab. But basically, if you know the growth rate of something, just like in economics, if you say you have $1,000 in the bank and you're going to get 10% interest on it, there's a way you can calculate how long it'll take for that to double. And it's really weird. Basically, you take 70 divided by the growth rate. So if I have take 10% and divide it by 70, basically that tells me in 7 years I'll double my money. Okay, so here we have the doubling times of human populations. And, we go back 800 BC and it took 4,200 years for our population to double. Okay, and then we got into the 2000s, from 1965 to 2000, it was 65 years, 51 years. Our population doubled. Okay. So once again, it's slowed down a little bit. It has slowed down, so estimates now will top out at about, around 9 or 10 billion is estimates now what our population will be in, 2050. So why is it slowing down is another question to look at. Okay. So here's kind of some different looks at this growth rate and what could happen. Okay. Overpopulation causes resource depletion and environmental degradation. All right. There's definitely some problems with what we're doing right now. Is it sustainable to have this many people with the resources that we have on the earth? All right. Second one, human ingenuity and technology will allow us to overcome any problems. More people may be beneficial. Okay, that's another outlook. Well, yes, we have technology-wise, we're able to feed more people, and we're able to do a lot more things and have a lot more people survive. But technology probably has its limits. Resources are sufficient to meet everyone's needs. Shortages are the result of greed, waste, and oppression. Okay. One thing that is definitely known is that for the world's population to increase, everybody can't live like we do. In other words, like Americans, Europeans do. So the amount of resources an American uses is double what other people in other countries use, whether you're talking about water or food or any kind of materials. So there is something to all three of those different views. All right, decisions on how many children are influenced by a lot of factors. Okay, and whenever I talk about this, you have to talk a little bit about religion and things like that. And living here in Cheney and having some schools next door to us, like Garden Plain and Conway Springs, that are, more Catholic. You usually see larger families. 8 to 10 was a common number that I would see when I was down at Conway Springs. Okay, so those have a factor. All our culture plays a big role in how many children people have. The average American has 2.1 children. Okay, and this is because of our lifestyle. Women are more in the workforce. They want to have a career. They want to put off having children. So this lowers our birth rate, which lowers our overall population growth. Family finances. Okay, even our family has made decisions. We have 3 kids. We wanted a boy, we wanted a girl, and then we wanted another kid after we had Zach and Jordan. Well, having a fourth, having a fifth, you have to make financial decisions on, will I have enough money to support them and get them through college? Okay, so those also have aspects as well. Okay, so like I said, this is demography, and we can look at statistically how things are happening in the world. And we talk about there being different, different countries, the demography is a lot different. And we can look at those statistics and gain a lot of information. So it says less developed countries represent 80% of the world's population, but more than 90% of their projected growth. Okay, so the world is growing, but where's the growth occurring? Well, it's growing in countries, some of the poorer countries in the world, okay, versus some of the richest countries in the world. They have a negative growth rate. So here's a picture of what that looks like in the predicted world totals by 2100. So developed worlds like Europe and Japan and the US, our population growth rates are 0 or even negative. In fact, there's some countries like in Europe, the European populations are going down, or classical European populations are going down. Now their populations are going up. Why is that? It's more because of immigration, people moving into their country. But the actual French people, they're not having very many kids. In fact, they're not even replacing themselves. Okay. So these are some world's largest countries and where they are now and where they're predicted to be. Okay. So right now, China is the largest, or in 2005, China was the largest at 1.3 billion. Okay. Now, most people know what China has done in their country. For many years, they had a one-child policy. And when you're a communist country, you're able to dictate things like that. You can dictate, hey, we need to slow down our population growth. And they did. Okay, it was very controversial to do that. But most people, they see the stories about, girl children being killed and things like that, and they see the atrocities, and they are terrible. And generally, that's not the policy that's doing that. Who is doing that? It's usually individuals that are doing the atrocities. Overall, is a question to ask yourself: is it better to do something like that and try to hold population down, or wait until population is out of control and you can't feed your people, and then millions die due to starvation? So it's kind of a hard question to ask, but something that maybe even the world will have to think of at some point in time. Okay, some definitions. Okay, fecundity, physical ability to reproduce. Okay, this is different than fertility. Okay, fecundity, some people just aren't, they can't have kids. Okay, so we have a certain portion of our population that can't reproduce. That's why we have something called a replacement rate. In other words, every couple needs to have 2.1 children to replace their population, or to keep our population level. All right. So they have to replace themselves. And what's the 0.1 about? Well, there's about 0.1% that don't have kids at all, or they die before they have kids. So this is where fecundity comes into part. Fertility, the actual production of offspring. Crude birth rates is just a ratio of births per thousand, and total fertility rates, number of children born to an average woman. Okay, and we'll look at that in more detail on this chart here. So look at this. Look at Africa versus North America. Okay, and look at the fertility rates. Okay, so the U.S. in 2006, it says North Americans are having a little over 2 children per couple. All right, look what it was back in the 1950s. It was closer to 4. All right. Now, in Africa, it was above 7. Now it's still above 5. Look at Asia, still above 6. Okay. So why is this? Why is their populations higher than ours? All right. This would be a great discussion to have if, I was there with you guys. But, think about what we have here in the U.S. We have family planning. People are able to make decisions on when they want to have children. We have contraception. Okay, those allow us to have the ability to determine and decide how many children we want to have. In other countries, that's not as readily available, and so usually human nature takes over if we don't have things to help us with that. Okay, I already talked about this, but here's just more of a statistical version of this. Japan was at 6 at one point in time. At 6, and imagine what their population would be if they continued with that. So they trimmed it down to 1.8 in 2 decades. All right, and this has done some good things for them. You could say, but also there's been some issues, and they've lessened this now. I think they'll allow people to have 2 kids now. All right. Another factor that plays a role in uh, demographics is life expectancy. Okay. So look at the difference in life expectancy in 1900 versus 2005. All right. Even in the US, it was 46 or 48, and now it's 75 and 80. All right. So what has happened? Why is it better now? Well, a couple of different things. First off, people are just obviously living longer. Okay. And we have better medicine. You can usually see that in countries that have better medicine, this is usually better. Another thing is infant mortality rates. So, infant mortality rate is how many children die at birth. Okay, and so this has a really big effect on your life expectancy. So, in 1900, did most, did India people only live to 23 on average? No. A lot of children died in infancy, but if they made it past 10 years old, probably they would live a longer life. It was just a lot were dying at a young age. Okay. So here is showing a graph that shows life expectancy and GNP. So basically, the same. We kind of see here that the more money people have, the longer life expectancy they have. If I have more money, I have better health care. All right. I'm able to make sure my children make it to an old age. I'm able to get the medications I need to live and survive. Okay. So in poorer countries, there's a difference there. Okay. And what causes that? There's a lot of things, behind the scenes that cause this indifference. All right. Dependency ratio, the number of non-working individuals compared to working individuals. Okay, this is going to become a real problem for the U.S., okay, down the road. All right. If current trends continue, by 2100, the median age of the U.S. will be 60. The average age will be 60 by 2100. Okay. That's putting a big chunk of our society past the retirement age or close to retirement or not as productive as they were in their 20s to 50s. Okay. So who's going to take care of all these people? All right. If your population is not growing, you don't have people to replace them, not only, doing the jobs like our industrial complex that we have to have people to do the jobs, to make the money, to do all the things to make us the powerful country we are. But we also need people to take care of our older population. So that's going to become an issue if we continue to not have very many children. Okay, this is a really important graph, and these are called age structure graphs. And we will be doing a lab where we'll look at these in more detail. All right, but basically this shows the amount of people in each demographic. Okay, so we've got males and females left and right, and then we've got how many of that population, what percentage of the population is at each age. All right, so the first graph on the left is one of Kenya. Okay, so very, very young population. All right, young population, and then not very many older people. Okay, so when we can look at a graph like this and we can determine what is where they are industrialized wise. In other words, we usually consider a country like Kenya as not developed or pre-developed or not industrialized. Okay, because all those indicators show that there's a low population, high population of young people, but they're not living very long. So that's telling us they're not very developed. They don't have good health care, not very good contraception, can't take care of their elderly, all those things. The one on the right is one of the US. Okay. And this is more what we want to see. We want to see each demographic, we want to see a similar amount being born. Okay. So that way you got enough to replace each other, but your population isn't too young or too old, and isn't fluctuating a lot. And that's kind of what the U.S. has done. Now, if you look at that 1950s bubble, so who are those people? Well, that's the baby boomers, and we'll show a slide that shows that. But after World War II, people came home. They were happy the war was over. We were really prosperous. So we had the baby boomers, and we had lots and lots. And so that bubble of people are getting older, okay? And that's the population that we're going to have to take care of as they age. Okay, so pronatalist pressures, factors that increase people's desire to have children, birth reduction pressures, factors that tend to reduce fertility. Okay, so I kind of already talked about those things. Factors that increase people's desire to have children. If things are going well, you're more likely to have kids. If things are going poorly, you might not have as many kids. Religion plays a part. Your society has a part. Okay, so here's basically a chart showing the U.S. going through what we call the demographic transition. In other words, going from a developing country to a developed country. Okay, so the demographic transition is something all societies kind of have to go through. All right, when we looked at that graph of Kenya versus the U.S., okay, the demographic transition is when their graph over time changes from what the Kenyan one looks like to the one the U.S. looks like. Okay, so ideally we want all these poorer countries to go through this demographic transition and look more like the U.S. So to become more industrialized so they can take care of their people. All right. So here's some different views on that. All right. World population will stabilize during the century. It's stabilizing some for sure, but we don't know, whether it's going to continue that in all different countries. Poorer countries of the world are caught in a demographic trap. Helping poor countries will only further threaten their resources. Okay. There is something to be considered about that. If everybody lived like us, like I said, it'd be tough for resources to. That's why we kind of want to get these other poor countries industrialized, just so they can control their population. If they become more industrialized, their population growth rates will probably go down. All right. So here's a picture of this demographic transition. And there's some things that occur, all right, during this. Okay, so birth rates and death rates, all right. When a country is becoming more developed, like you see way over on the right, versus pre-developed, okay, think about the U.S. population or the world population. It stayed steady and pretty low for a long time, all right. Things start going well for population. Then birth rates increase or kind of, they stay steady, but death rates go down. Okay, so as death rates go down, our total population goes up, even though our birth rates are staying the same. All right, now eventually it's kind of a lagging thing. All right, the birth rates kind of stay steady, the death rates go down first, then later on in this demographic transition, birth rates begin to equal death rates as we reach a developed country and our population, total population, steadies. So, interesting cartoon here. Basically, I don't wish to interfere, but do you realize the world population is going to increase by nearly 50% in 20 years? What are you going to do about it? Basically one has the idea that, poor, underdeveloped countries, why are you having all these kids? Well, and so the industrialized countries blaming them, and then the one guy says that, 80%, the rich consume 80%. So it's kind of on both sides here, I would say. Okay, another thing that plays a role in this is women's rights and infant mortality rates. As women are given rights, as women are become educated, infant mortality rates go down, and also the amount of children per woman decreases as well. So education is important. Educating females and males and everyone is important to keeping fertility rates down. Okay, and these are just three possibilities of what our population can do in the next. Realistically, when this is high is unrealistic that would happen. Probably we're going to level off a little bit more into the medium. All right. Thanks, and